Ethan's shuttle descended slowly through the misty clouds of the alien world. The sensors flickered, struggling to adjust to the strange atmosphere. Everything about this planet felt alive. The air hummed with energy, the ground pulsed slightly under his feet, and the faint glow of distant flora painted the landscape in soft blues and greens. He had responded to a distress signal, barely understanding the language it came in, yet something about it called to him. He knew he could not turn away. When he stepped out of the shuttle, the ground beneath him was soft and springy, almost like it had its own rhythm. He felt it move slightly with each step, and he had to adjust to keep his balance. The city ahead of him was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering crystalline structures rose from the ground like frozen waterfalls, refracting the dim light in countless directions. Vines with shimmering leaves crawled across the buildings, moving as if they were aware of him, reacting to his presence with subtle waves. The air smelled sweet and metallic at the same time, a combination that made him feel slightly dizzy but oddly energized. Ethan moved cautiously, aware that he was not alone. He had trained for alien encounters, but nothing could truly prepare a human for the sensation of being entirely out of place. Suddenly, a soft hum echoed through the air, vibrating his chest and sending a shiver up his spine. The sound was melodic but strangely commanding, almost as if it was calling his name without words. He followed it instinctively, stepping over roots and glowing mushrooms, until he arrived at a massive structure in the center of the city. It was a palace, but not like any palace from human history. The walls appeared to be liquid crystal, flowing and shifting slowly, reflecting the colors of the environment in impossible patterns. At the base of the palace, figures moved gracefully, their forms unlike anything human, tall, slender, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to ripple with light. Ethan froze for a moment, sensing their awareness, and took a careful step forward. A voice not heard but felt entered his mind, vibrating through his senses. "You are here," it said, calm but curious. Ethan froze. His training screamed that telepathy was possible, but he had never experienced it. I received a distress signal," he said aloud, unsure if it mattered. "I want to help." A figure approached from the palace entrance, moving with a strange elegance that seemed almost supernatural. She was taller than any human, her body lithe, and her skin shimmered in soft silver and pale blue. Her face was smooth, almost mask-like, and her eyes were opaque, milky white. Ethan realized then she could not see. The queen, he thought, must be blind. She reached out her hands before her, moving them slowly in the air, sensing the environment in ways he could barely understand. As she approached, her fingers brushed against the air near him, and Ethan instinctively stepped back. Then her hands touched him, her long, slender fingers moving across his chest, arms, and shoulders. Ethan flinched, startled. Her touch was strange, deliberate but off, reaching for points on his body that made no sense to a human. His instincts told him to pull away, but he remembered the warning of his commander. This alien's perception of touch might be completely different. Ethan forced himself to stay calm. I'm not a threat," he said softly. The queen paused, tilting her head slightly. The hum in his chest changed, slower now, cautious. Her fingers shifted again, brushing over his arms and down his sides. Ethan noticed she did not touch aggressively or threateningly, just uncertainly, as if she were trying to map his body through sensation alone. It was awkward, confusing, and slightly frightening, but he reminded himself, this was not malice, this was curiosity. After a few moments, she withdrew her hands and stepped back. Ethan exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. "I'm Ethan," he said. "I came from another world to help." The queen's hum changed again, softening. She extended a hand, and a wave of pressure ran through his senses, almost like an invitation. "Velira," she communicated, the sensation warm and steady. "You come willingly?" Ethan nodded. "Yes. I came willingly." For the next few hours he followed her through the palace. The halls were alive, walls shifting like liquid, floors soft and responsive. Valira moved ahead, feeling the air and floor, guiding him with subtle gestures. Every time her hand reached toward him, Ethan braced himself, but he noticed that the touches were always exploratory, never harmful. Sometimes her hands brushed his arm, chest, or back in ways that made him tense, but he learned quickly to interpret the rhythm of her gestures. Each movement told him something: curiosity, caution, or warning. The palace itself seemed almost alive. Bioluminescent tendrils rose from the floors and walls, curling toward them as if acknowledging the human presence. Ethan realized that the entire building, and perhaps the city itself, responded to Valira's heightened senses. She moved effortlessly through spaces that seemed impossible to navigate, feeling vibrations that no human could detect, avoiding hazards before they became dangerous. At one point she paused, placing her hand against a wall. The wall rippled like water and a soft voice or sensation entered Ethan's mind. "They sense you," it said, almost like a whisper. "Not all are friendly." Ethan swallowed, realizing that their journey would not be simple. He trusted her guidance, but he knew that his presence alone might stir tension or fear among her people. He followed her silently, allowing her to take the lead. Soon, they arrived at a large chamber. It was circular, with a high ceiling that seemed to stretch into darkness. The walls were lined with alien statues, each one radiating a soft glow. Valira moved to the center and raised her hands, sweeping them through the air. Ethan watched as the glow of the statues responded to her movement, brightening and dimming in sequence. It was as if the room itself recognized her, obeyed her, and even celebrated her presence. Ethan's mind raced. How could a species evolve with such a different way of sensing the world? Their intelligence was staggering. And yet, despite her blindness, Valira moved with a confidence that he found almost humbling. She reached out to him again, her hands brushing against his arms, shoulders, and finally resting lightly on his chest. Ethan felt a warmth, a sense of recognition and acceptance that transcended words. He realized that her wrong touches were not mistakes. They were her way of understanding, connecting, and learning. The alien queen, in all her power and strangeness, was trying to communicate trust and curiosity in the only way she knew how. Ethan's initial fear melted into patience and even a strange sense of wonder. Hours passed as they explored the palace together. Ethan learned to interpret her gestures, and she seemed to sense his intentions as well. The queen occasionally reached for points on his body that made him flinch, but he no longer recoiled. He understood that her perception of touch was different from his own, and that knowledge gave him a sense of control in an otherwise alien environment. Eventually, they arrived at a chamber filled with soft, glowing mats and walls lined with alien plants. Valira gestured for him to sit. Ethan obeyed, and she moved beside him, placing her hand on the floor in front of them. Vibrations traveled through the room, and he realized that she was communicating through patterns of pressure and sound, sharing emotions and impressions rather than words. He tried to reciprocate, tapping the floor in rhythmic patterns, sending vibrations back to her. She responded immediately, adjusting her movements and touch, creating a dialogue that neither could fully describe with human language. Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment and connection that was almost overwhelming. By the end of the night, Ethan understood that trust had begun to form between them. Valira, despite her blindness and alien perception, had accepted him into her presence. And Ethan, in turn, had learned patience, humility, and the power of human adaptability. As he lay down on the soft mats to rest, he realized that the true challenge had only just begun. The Queen's people were watching him, the palace itself seemed alive, and the planet held secrets and dangers that he could barely imagine. Yet he felt ready. For the first time since leaving Earth, Ethan felt that he belonged somewhere, at least for now. And as Valira rested beside him, her hand brushing the floor lightly. He knew that their journey together would be filled with wonder, discovery, and perhaps a bond that no human or alien had ever experienced before. Ethan woke to the soft glow of the palace, filtered through walls that seemed to ripple like liquid. The air smelled faintly sweet, carrying a subtle metallic note that made him feel alert and alive. He sat up slowly, remembering the events of the previous night, the queen, her awkward but genuine gestures, and the strange sense of connection that had grown between them. Velira, the blind alien queen, had accepted him, and for the first time on this strange planet, he felt a thread of belonging. He stretched and noticed that Velira was already awake, kneeling near the edge of the chamber. Her hand moved delicately across the floor, sending small vibrations that seemed to pulse through the room. Ethan realized she was listening, sensing, communicating through the very air and ground around her. Her entire body radiated focus and awareness, a heightened form of intelligence that humans could barely comprehend. "Morning," Ethan said cautiously, aware that she could not see him. His voice vibrated through the chamber, and she immediately turned toward him, raising her hands in the air. The vibrations intensified slightly, a signal of acknowledgement, curiosity, and perhaps amusement. Velira moved toward him with her usual fluid grace, her fingers brushing against the air, finding him without eyes. When her hands landed on his shoulders, Ethan flinched slightly, but only out of habit. By now, he had learned that her touches were never harmful. They were exploratory, a way of understanding him in her own alien manner. The day's tasks began quickly. The palace, beautiful as it was, hid dangers that only Velira's senses could detect. There were creatures in the city, ancient predators, alert and intelligent, that hunted by sensing vibrations and energy. Her people had been struggling to protect her, and Ethan realized why. He had survived countless missions in space and combat zones on Earth, but nothing had prepared him for a predator that could feel your heartbeat and intentions before you even moved. Velira guided him through the palace corridors, teaching him to move without disturbing the air too much, to step softly, to sense vibrations through his boots. Ethan noticed the elegance in her movements, the way she avoided obstacles before he even perceived them. He tried to mirror her motions, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing, but she adjusted her guidance without frustration, sending gentle vibrations of encouragement. Midday came, and the alarm arrived. The palace vibrated differently, signaling danger. Ethan recognized the pattern almost immediately. The predator was near. It was massive, covered in shimmering scales, moving silently yet detectable through the subtle distortions it caused in the floor and air. Velira signaled for him to stay close. They moved into a large chamber filled with glowing plants. Ethan noticed that some of the flora responded to movement and touch, emitting pulses of light. Using her hands and vibrations, Velira taught him how to manipulate the environment subtly, distracting or confusing the predator if needed. Ethan realized that the entire planet was alive in a way, sensitive to motion, sound, and energy, and that humans could adapt if they paid attention. The predator attacked suddenly, bursting into the chamber with a terrifying speed. Ethan barely had time to react, raising a protective arm instinctively. Velira moved beside him, sensing its movements before it made them. Her hands reached out not to strike, but to guide him. When the predator lunged, Ethan sidestepped just in time, remembering the lessons she had imparted. Together, they created a makeshift trap, using the glowing plants to distract the predator and lure it into a chamber that could safely contain it. Ethan marveled at the cooperation, the human mind planning traps, the alien queen sensing the slightest changes in energy, movement, and vibration. It was teamwork unlike anything he had ever experienced. After the predator was secured, Ethan realized how much he had learned from her. He had adapted to her world, to her senses, and to her ways of thinking. and she in turn had adapted to him, learning the patterns and instincts of humans, trusting him in ways she had never trusted anyone before. During a brief pause, Valira reached out to him again, her hands moving in that same curious manner that had startled him initially. But now Ethan understood. Her gestures were precise, confident, and gentle. He felt no fear, only a strange warmth, a sense of partnership. It was clear that the initial awkwardness had turned into something deeper, a mutual understanding built from patience and observation. As the day progressed, Ethan explored more of the palace and the city with Valira. He noticed subtle signs of her people's concern for the predator and their queen's safety. Some watched him closely, wary of the human, but Valira's presence reassured them. Ethan began to communicate with them, using a combination of vibrations, gestures, and limited words. He felt the bond extending beyond the queen, into the alien court itself. Humanity, he realized, could be respected in ways that transcended language and appearance. By evening, the palace was calm. The predator was secured, the city quiet, and Ethan finally allowed himself to rest. Valira sat nearby, her hand resting lightly on the floor in front of him, fingers moving slightly as if testing the vibrations of the chamber. Ethan reached out, tapping the floor in response. The two communicated silently, exchanging emotions and impressions without words. It was a dialogue that neither species had used before, a bridge built from curiosity and trust. Ethan reflected on the day's events. He had come to this planet to help, not realizing that he would also learn, adapt, and grow. Valira had taught him patience, humility, and the importance of observation. And he had taught her in his way about human ingenuity, strategy, and the ability to adapt under pressure. Together they had faced danger and survived, forming a bond that neither species could have anticipated. Night fell, and the city glowed softly under alien moons. Ethan looked around at the palace, the living walls, the glowing plants, and the silent watchers. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment and belonging. For the first time in his life, he realized that being human was not just about physical strength or intellect. It was about adaptability, courage, and the willingness to understand and connect with others, even those vastly different from oneself. Valira's hand moved again, brushing lightly against his arm in a gesture that was now familiar and comforting. Ethan smiled slightly, understanding her intentions immediately. She was acknowledging their partnership, expressing trust and acceptance. The earlier awkwardness of her hands reaching somewhere wrong was gone, replaced by confidence and shared understanding. They sat in silence for a long while, communicating through vibrations and gestures, sharing thoughts and impressions that could not be spoken. Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had survived the planet, the predator, and the initial misunderstandings. But more importantly, he had connected with a species unlike any other, forming a bond that could change the future of human-alien relations forever. The next morning, Ethan would begin training the alien guards, using his knowledge to strengthen their defenses, and preparing for threats that even Valira could sense but not fully counter. He would teach them about human strategy, improvisation, and technology, while continuing to learn from her heightened senses, intuition, and understanding of the world around them. Together, they would become a formidable team. For now, however, they rested. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the soft vibrations of the floor, the palace, and Valira's presence nearby. He understood that trust and partnership could bridge even the widest gaps between species. And in that understanding, he found not just safety and survival, but something rarer: connection, respect, and the beginning of a friendship that might one day lead to something even greater. As the twin moons rose in the alien sky, casting silver light across the palace, Ethan and Valira sat side by side. No words were needed. Their actions, touches, and vibrations spoke louder than any language. The bond they had formed was strong, unbreakable, and built on mutual respect, understanding, and the courage to reach across the unknown. Humanity had found a place here, not just as a visitor but as a partner, and Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. The planet's hum continued through the night, steady and calm. Ethan felt it resonating within him, a reminder that he had survived, adapted, and connected. Valira's hand shifted slightly, brushing against his once more. Not awkwardly, not mistakenly, but intentionally, a gesture of recognition, trust, and perhaps even something more. Ethan understood immediately and allowed himself to relax fully for the first time since his arrival. Tomorrow they would face new challenges. Predators, the alien court, and the mysteries of the planet still awaited. But tonight, for the first time, humanity and alien intelligence had met on equal terms, guided not by fear or misunderstanding, but by curiosity, respect, and the willingness to learn from one another. And in that silent, glowing chamber, under the watchful presence of the blind alien queen, Ethan finally understood the power of human resilience and the strength that came from true connection. It was a lesson he would carry forever, a story that would define not only his future, but perhaps the future of humanity itself.